What unfolds when a 35-year-old African leader steps into a chamber filled with the globe's most influential figures and declines to play by their rules? Everyone anticipated him arriving in search of assistance. Needy, thankful, predictable. Yet instead, he arrived with something audacious. A vision that didn't just question the current order. It threatened to revolutionize an entire continent. This narrative doesn't begin in a hamlet or on a warfront. It begins in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, within a fortress of influence, where billionaires leisurely sip espresso while orchestrating the fate of countries. Where polished marble floors mirror more than just light. They echo legacy, aspiration, and supremacy. Still, on this distinct day, one man's silent rebellion would unsettle the chamber. This isn't merely a story of governance or finance, it's about dignity, self-definition. The kind of recognition that isn't handed out, it's seized. So what happens when someone opts not to follow the agenda, when they rewrite it entirely? By the end of this account, you'll grasp how one unforeseen moment, just a dialogue, truly reverberated across 3 continents. How it rebranded a so-called impoverished country into a credible contender. Not a submissive beneficiary of international goodwill, but a collaborator with strength and intent. It was March 15th. The King Abdulaziz Conference Center shimmered like a vision made real. The floors were immaculate, echoing each stride. The Riyadh skyline loomed as a testament to present-day empire. Steel and glass pierced the heavens, monuments to oil-powered ambition. Inside, the air buzzed with restrained tension. This wasn't just another economic summit, it was the crucible. The arena where handshakes could unlock fortunes, where the gaze of one decision maker could ignite or erase entire projects, where showing up meant proving your worth. The roster read like a directory of global authority, Silicon Valley innovators, Texan oil magnates, German manufacturing moguls, and world leaders holding nuclear keys and hidden strategies. And into this pressure-filled arena stepped a youthful African head of state, composed, unwavering, and utterly uninterested in obeying their standards. Precisely at 9:00 a.m., Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman entered the Grand Hall, and the ambience immediately altered. He didn't need to utter a syllable. At 38, he was already a transformative presence. The architect of Saudi Arabia's stunning evolution, towers ascending from the dunes, a $1 trillion fantasy called Neom, and a bold blueprint to Vision 2030. A strategy not only remolding his own nation, but reimagining the destiny of the entire Middle East. This wasn't merely a conference. Today, the prince would determine which among the globe's heavyweights would gain entry to Saudi Arabia's colossal $2 trillion public investment fund. In essence, he would determine who earned a seat at the table. By dawn, the world's financial aristocracy had begun arriving. Their jets lined the runway like metallic chess pieces at King Khalid International Airport. Tailored suits, flawless smiles, strategized postures. Each one came armed with sleek decks, polished forecasts, and calculated optimism. Their goal to shape tomorrow, through clean tech, AI, aerospace innovations, and intelligent infrastructure. This was the marketplace of the future, and everyone aimed for a stake. Some appearances were anticipated. Singapore's president pitched semiconductors. Brazil's foreign affairs chief had an initiative for agro-technology. Even Estonia's prime minister arrived, offering state-of-the-art digital administration. But nestled deep within the program, almost like a clerical oversight, there appeared a name that triggered raised eyebrows and curious stares: Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso. Murmurs spread like a blaze. Burkina what? A landlocked nation in West Africa that barely registered on most people's global map. A state whose entire GDP was smaller than what some of the attendees had spent on secluded villas or rare artwork. Infrastructure, decaying. Global presence, virtually invisible. So what was he doing here? What could the head of a so-called underdeveloped nation possibly contribute to a hall brimming with trillion-dollar visionaries and decision architects? No one realized it yet, but before the day concluded, they wouldn't be smirking. They'd be paying attention. Behind him, minimal assets, almost zero international leverage. In front of him, a chamber packed with heavyweights, and all around him, skepticism. Why is he even present? One of the German delegates whispered under his breath, Burkina Faso. What could a small, landlocked West African nation possibly offer to Saudi Arabia? It sounded absurd. But that very question, the one tossed out casually, was about to reverse the entire dynamic, because the response would dismantle their assumptions about dominance, alliances, and who truly holds the pen that drafts tomorrow. The morning unfolded in a steady rhythm, polished presentations delivered with corporate precision. Animated slides, sky-high projections, confidence engineered by marketing departments. Each speaker looked the role. Custom-fitted attire, camera-ready grins, perfect composure. They were smooth, practiced, predictable. The Crown Prince listened intently. He posed sharp, pointed questions. He nodded thoughtfully. He delivered the standard diplomatic responses. We'll consider that. Let's explore it further. Very interesting. It was protocol, not passion. Professional, certainly, but uninspired. Routine, distant. Then came lunch. The hall transformed into a mingling arena. Small pockets of guests sipped espresso and swapped LinkedIn connections. Saudi hosts drifted through the space, cordial yet reserved, ensuring the ambience remained polished, refined, and composed. And then, almost imperceptibly at first, Ibrahim Traoré entered. He didn't make a scene. He didn't need to. Yet the atmosphere shifted as soon as he appeared. At just 35, he was younger than nearly all the corporate magnates present. But there was something about him. A grounded stillness, an assured confidence that made people take notice. And unlike every other statesman in attendance, he wasn't dressed for the trading floor. No designer blazer, no silk accessory. He wore the military uniform of his country. Plain, aged, and unmistakably genuine. It wasn't attire for effect. It was a message, not about style, about identity. About refusing to disguise who he was, regardless of the environment. The cloth wasn't luxurious. The cut wasn't immaculate. But he wore it like a badge, like conviction. And without uttering a single sentence, he made something unmistakably known. He didn't arrive to conform. Conversations softened, faces turned, no dramatic movements, no elite name dropping. He didn't dart from group to group distributing contact cards. He stood still, observed, measured, like a man holding knowledge others lacked. And he did. His name rested unnoticed at the tail end of the conference schedule, a placement many dismissed outright, a background slot. The moment attendees usually started mentally checking out, eyeing their dinner plans and departure times. They assumed the event had peaked. But Ibrahim Traoré was only just beginning. The Crown Prince had been enduring slide decks and buzzwords for hours. His expression stayed diplomatic, controlled. But for those watching closely, it was evident his attentiveness was waning. Even the most dominant figure in the hall was growing weary. A few participants were already peeking at their devices. Some murmured about early exits, watching the minutes and calculating their departure. Then the moderator took the microphone and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso." The clapping was courteous at best. A few scattered applauses. No real buzz. You could sense it in the air. This felt like a checkbox moment, a symbolic gesture, the type of time slot used to fulfill protocol, not to disrupt expectations. Even the Crown Prince reclined slightly in his seat, clearly preparing himself for what he likely assumed would be another routine presentation, a well-worded address. Nothing groundbreaking. Then Traoré ascended the platform. No computer, no high-tech slides, no elaborate list of bullet points. Just him, alone, standing tall behind the podium in full military dress. Not speaking right away, just observing, holding eye contact, methodically surveying the audience, silent for long enough that it started to feel uncomfortable. Long enough for the attendees to shift restlessly, uncertain about what was unfolding. And then, in a voice that didn't require amplification, he spoke, steady, crisp, and impossible to tune out. "Your Royal Highness," he began. "Distinguished participants, I want to pose a question." He paused. The room gradually began to focus in again. "When you shut your eyes and imagine the future, what is it that you see?" Now, attention locked in. No diplomatic gratitude. No compliments for Saudi generosity. No introductory data on Burkina Faso. Just a piercing, unexpected inquiry. "Do you envision taller towers? Quicker processors, more intelligent systems, he asked. Or do you envision people standing straighter, walking with pride, dreaming without limits? There was a palpable shift. You could feel it sweep across the room. Even Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman arched an eyebrow, subtly, but it spoke volumes. This wasn't a typical investment showcase. Then Traore did something unexpected. He stepped away from the lectern. He moved closer to the crowd, like a teacher stepping off stage to engage in genuine dialogue. For the past 6 hours, he said, I've heard brilliant minds discuss market expansion, profit ratios, financial yield. All valid, no question. But there's been barely a whisper about the one factor that underwrites every outcome: human potential. He let the words settle. The air was motionless. Then he turned directly toward the Crown Prince. Your Highness, he said, your nation has invested astutely across continents. Silicon Valley, European manufacturing, Asian technology leaders. You've allied with nations already rich in capital, in systems, in balance. And then came the line no one saw coming. But allow me to ask, when was the last time you placed capital in raw human hunger? It wasn't a request. It was a provocation. Laid squarely in the heart of the world's most elite chamber, a few representatives exchanged uncertain looks. This didn't feel like a proposal anymore. It was beginning to resemble a TED Talk, or perhaps a reckoning. I come from a region most of you have likely never studied, Traore continued. Faso, the land of people who stand tall. He wasn't consulting a script. He didn't need one. Every syllable carried the weight of experience. We lack petroleum like some of our neighbors, he said. No diamond quarries, no coastal edges, no vast docks or shipping lanes. He paused, then added, almost defiantly, but what we possess is something this world is rapidly depleting. Individuals who still believe the unthinkable is worth the effort. There was a faint stir as he reached into his uniform jacket. He pulled out a small, aged item, a photograph. The front row instinctively leaned closer. He raised it for all to see. This image was taken 3 months ago in a village called Guango, he said. The child in this photo, his name is Musa. He's 10. Until very recently, he'd never laid eyes on electric light. Now, the room was frozen. The kind of silence you could slice through. His village had no power grid, no electrical lines. When the sun disappeared, the day ended. That was the routine, darkness. Traore's tone remained composed, but something new flickered beneath it, like a quiet flame rising. But 3 months ago, he said, we installed our first community solar panel in Guango. Not through donations, not with loans from the World Bank, but with funds we mobilized ourselves, by reforming how we manage our agriculture, by purging corruption from our mining sector. He glanced around the room. Everyone was paying attention now. Even the Crown Prince had stopped scrolling on his tablet. So what happened when Musa's home lit up for the first time? He let the question breathe. No one stirred. He didn't throw a celebration. He didn't shout in excitement. He looked at his father and said, now we can study after dark. Now we can build something. Traore paused. Let that line land. 10 years old, he said gently, and his first instinct wasn't to celebrate, it was to create. Traore began to move across the stage. Slowly, intentionally. His eyes locked with faces that, just 1 hour earlier, had dismissed him entirely. That photo of Musa, he said, voice unwavering, that's why I came here today. He paused again, not for charity, not for foreign donations, not for development funds. I came to speak about partnership, genuine partnership, between countries with capital and countries with hunger. Hunger to expand, hunger to invent. Now he halted, directly in front of the Crown Prince's table. Your Highness, he said, locking eyes with the man capable of altering destiny with a single decision. You've spoken eloquently about guiding Saudi Arabia beyond oil, toward technology, tourism, green power, and entertainment. All visionary steps. But if I may, the room tightened. What if your greatest legacy isn't replacing oil with innovation, but replacing transactions with transformation? A current rippled across the hall. You could see unease on a few faces. Traore had just stepped past a line most global leaders tiptoe around. No one, absolutely no one, addresses Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman this directly, especially not a president from a nation whose entire economy is smaller than a single Saudi mega project. But Traore stood firm. His tone became bolder, more compelling. Africa isn't here with a tin cup and hopeful slogans, he said. We're here with a vision that can reshape the global story. 1 billion people across 54 nations, most under the age of 25. The youngest, most vibrant population on the planet. We have resources. We have rich soils. We have sunlight, wind, and rivers bursting with renewable potential. But even more, we possess something that can't be measured in charts. Forward momentum. And our story is still unfolding. Then, for the first time, he revealed a device, a basic tablet. He tapped its screen, and behind him, the massive monitors flickered to life. A clean, vivid map of Africa appeared. Lines stretched across it, from west to east, like lifelines in a living organism. This, he said, is the Eshel Infrastructure Corridor. The audience leaned forward. Roads, railways, power networks, fiber optic cables. 8,000 kilometers uniting Dakar with Djibouti. 12 countries. One continental vision, not drawn up by foreign advisors in Paris or London. Designed by us, African engineers, strategists, and economists. The mood in the room had changed completely. Delegates were focused. Phones faced down. Pens began to write. Eyes stayed glued. The cost, he said, with a quiet grin. $800 million. Less than what this kingdom invests in one luxury resort. A pause. But the impact, that's something no 5-star resort can deliver. Picture this: farms in West Africa fueling industries in East Africa. Solar energy collected in the Sahel powering homes from Senegal to Sudan. That's not just development, Traore said. That's destiny. He turned slightly, allowing his voice to carry the room into imagination. Now picture this. High-speed internet connecting African universities directly with global research centers. Students in Burkina Faso, working in real time with scientists in Tokyo, Berlin, or Boston. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was no longer just watching, he was fully engaged, leaning forward. Arms rested on the table, eyes locked in. This was no longer a presentation. Something had shifted. But let me explain why this should matter to you, Your Highness, Traore said, stepping forward once more. This isn't only about Africa's rise. This is a rare moment. For Saudi Arabia to become the bridge the world didn't realize it needed. He gestured toward the illuminated map behind him. Every ton of goods transported along this corridor could flow through Saudi ports. Every watt of renewable energy fueling this network could be powered by Saudi solar technology. Every link, from Cairo to Cape Town, could be grounded on Saudi-built infrastructure. With a simple tap, the screen changed. Trade forecasts, economic growth projections, concrete numbers, real-world potential. Even under our most conservative models, this corridor boosts Saudi African trade by more than 400% over the next decade. He paused. But beyond the numbers, this reframes Saudi Arabia's legacy, not as a kingdom reacting to change, but as one leading it. It doesn't just make you a regional power, it makes you a global connector. The nation that helped bind Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Americas into one operational ecosystem. Then the energy shifted again. Traore moved into the soul of his address. The screens displayed plans, rollout strategies, timelines, and investment routes. But he didn't let it become a sterile pitch from a spreadsheet. He kept tying it to something more human. Your Highness, he said, voice firm and genuine, every great empire in the annals of history, every lasting legacy, wasn't remembered by what it hoarded. It was remembered by what it created. The Egyptians built pyramids. The Romans built roads. The British built ships. Then, without warning, he tapped again. The screen went black. The room dimmed. A single spotlight lit him. So the question is, what will Saudi Arabia build? He stepped forward. Now center stage. Every eye followed. Every breath was still. I say build bridges. Not just steel ones, human bridges, trade bridges. Bridges linking the world's youngest continent to its most visionary kingdom. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was heavy. The kind of silence that lands deep in your chest. The kind that doesn't signal boredom, but transformation. The kind that means people aren't just hearing, they're listening, reconsidering, awakening. This wasn't a polite sales pitch from a poor, landlocked republic anymore. This had become something else. This was not theoretical. This was a bold political vision, with immediate global stakes. And just as the room thought they'd seen the full picture of Ibrahim Traoré, he did what no one anticipated. He calmly closed his tablet, stepped away from the microphone, and faced the crowd. No slides, no stats, no tech, just him and his voice. "But here's the truth," he said, voice unwavering, piercing the still air of the hall. "I didn't come here to ask for your investment." Heads turned sharply. A ripple of surprise moved like wind through the room. Even Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman straightened, his attention sharpening again. "I came here," he paused, "just enough, were to offer you something far more valuable than a financial contract." A pause. The room leaned in. "I'm offering you a place in history. Not as a kingdom that grew rich off fossil fuels, but as a kingdom that helped others become rich through their own natural wealth. Not a state that purchased influence, but a state that earned it. Through alliance, through dignity, through partnership." The air was dense now, not with decorum, but with significance. You could sense the transition. "The Trans-Sahel corridor will be established," Traore stated plainly, "whether Saudi Arabia aligns with us or not." And just like that, the atmosphere in the room shifted, tangibly. "We already possess pledges from nearby allies," he continued. "Interest from Chinese contractors, preliminary discussions with European lenders, US firms conducting their assessments. We are not here requesting a rescue. We are inviting you to collaborate with us, not on our behalf." It was a daring declaration, perhaps even unprecedented in that forum. A head of state from one of the globe's most impoverished nations, addressing one of the richest, most influential, declaring that their backing was appreciated, but not essential. But Traore wasn't done. "If Saudi Arabia decides to support this initiative," he declared, "you won't just be sponsoring train tracks or data cables. You'll be endorsing something far greater, the evolution of South-South synergy. You'll be demonstrating that genuine influence doesn't stem from possessing assets. It arises from amplifying them." Then he descended from the podium and strolled slowly toward the Crown Prince's table. But this time, it didn't resemble a proposal anymore. It resembled a moment of unified aspiration. Two dignitaries engaging, as counterparts. "Your Highness," he said, "you've articulated Vision 2030 with conviction, about converting Saudi Arabia into a worldwide nexus." He paused, then projected his voice just enough for the entire hall to catch. "But what about Vision 2050? Envision Saudi Arabia not merely transformed, but transformative. The kingdom that helped elevate a continent. The kingdom that helped redraw the international blueprint." No clapping yet, just quiet. The sort of quiet that says everyone's attentive. "Visualize this. Saudi enterprises not merely operating in Africa, but evolving alongside Africa. Imagine Saudi scholars enrolling in institutions constructed with Saudi capital. Right on African terrain. Now reverse the narrative. African scholars collaborating in Saudi research centers, energized by minerals extracted from their homeland." This wasn't just another infrastructure plea. Traore was illustrating a dream, audacious, broad, and entirely divergent from the standard storyline. Not the customary north to south flow. Not one hand giving and the other receiving. "That's why I didn't bring a PowerPoint," he stated directly, "because I'm not here to seek funding." He didn't arrive with a battalion of advisors, no polished portfolios, no sleek slides brimming with economic projections. No, he came solo, one statesman, speaking directly to another, proposing a union of equals. He stepped forward, right up to the Crown Prince. Close enough for a personal exchange, but audible enough for the full chamber. "Your Highness," he said, "Saudi Arabia's most significant legacy won't be the highest tower, or the swiftest locomotive, or the most advanced AI. Your greatest triumph will be proving that real strength isn't about cornering economies. It's about cultivating economies. It's not about monopolizing assets, but enhancing them. Not about purchasing allegiance, but commanding admiration." The chamber became utterly hushed. At that instant, everyone realized they were either witnessing a pivotal juncture in global relations or observing someone gamble everything and collapse dramatically. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman remained completely composed, his demeanor inscrutable. The pressure was heavy enough to slice through. Every representative sensed it. This could either ignite a groundbreaking alliance or implode catastrophically. Then, at last, the Crown Prince responded. His tone was steady, but unmistakably clear, ringing through the hush like a chime. "President Traore," he said, "over the last 5 years, I've received thousands of business overtures, innumerable pitches and requests. mostly centered on what Saudi Arabia can contribute. Our finances, our trade routes, our geostrategic stance. He paused, gaze fixed on Traore. You, he said, rising up right now, commanding the space, are the first individual to highlight what Saudi Arabia can evolve into. And with that, the atmosphere transformed. This was no longer merely a briefing. It was an occasion, one no attendee in that chamber would overlook. Ladies and gentlemen, the Crown Prince proceeded. What we just experienced isn't just another address. It's the caliber of visionary thought that will steer global progress for generations to follow. President Traore didn't arrive here pleading for us to remedy Africa's challenges. He arrived inviting us to participate in Africa's advancements. The Crown Prince stood completely, then began pacing slowly around his table, gradually moving closer to where Traore remained. This, he said, pointing toward the platform, this is precisely the sort of alliance Vision 2030 was designed to cultivate ties rooted in reciprocal value, mutual advancement, and sincere appreciation for each contributor's strengths. Halting directly before Traore, close enough that their dialogue felt intimate, though the entire audience strained to catch each word. He added, Mr. President, your Trans-Sahel Infrastructure Corridor is exactly the kind of game-changing venture Saudi Arabia is eager to support. Not because we perceive Africa as a beneficiary of goodwill, but because we recognize Africa as a legitimate collaborator in shaping tomorrow's world economy. Then, turning to engage the entire delegation, he made a pronouncement that reverberated throughout the space. Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund will allocate $500 million to launch the initial stage of the Trans-Sahel Infrastructure Corridor, he announced, and additional resources will follow, dependent on project benchmarks and the involvement of our fellow nations. The response was instantaneous, audible gasps, hushed commentary, glances exchanged. This wasn't merely a fiscal commitment. It was a powerful, unmistakable declaration. Saudi Arabia was redefining its approach to Africa, from seeing it as an aid recipient to embracing it as a geopolitical counterpart. But the Crown Prince had more to say. Furthermore, he went on, Saudi Arabia will inaugurate a permanent African partnership office right here in Riyadh, dedicated solely to fostering South-South collaboration and prosperity. Then, in a move nobody foresaw, he extended a proposition. President Traore, he said, I would consider it a privilege if you would preside as chair of the advisory council for this groundbreaking platform. The gesture was momentous. Traditionally, African dignitaries visited Saudi Arabia for ceremonies or forums. Rarely were they invited to help architect Saudi strategy itself. Traore gave a reserved nod, but his expression said everything. The magnitude of the moment was profound. This surpassed monetary value, surpassed development. It touched on honor, on mutual esteem, on proving that authentic alliance could outmatch dependency. Your Highness, Traore responded, this alliance will be commemorated as the point when the global South ceased to compete and began to collaborate, when capital became an instrument to generate more prosperity, not just to safeguard it. The Crown Prince grinned, genuine warmth emerging on his face for the first time that day. Mr. President, he said, I believe you are entirely correct. And I believe this collaboration will yield benefits for both our nations far beyond what we can presently foresee. The official gathering concluded with restrained applause, but the true excitement ignited in the informal dialogues that followed. Envoys from other African states swiftly approached Traore, eager to learn how their own nations could connect to this rising coalition. In discreet corners of the venue, European and American delegates began quietly doing calculations, pondering how this Saudi-African partnership might alter their own influence on the continent. But the most pivotal moment, that occurred far from the spotlight and microphones. As the summit hall began to empty and dignitaries trickled out into the Riyadh evening, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman approached Traore for a private word. Mr. President, he murmured, your address today wasn't merely compelling. It was essential. For some time now, Saudi Arabia has sought meaningful partnerships, not just transactions. Today, you demonstrated exactly what that looks like. Traore inclined his head, appreciative. Your Highness, he replied, Burkina Faso has learned that dignity holds more value than aid, and that true partnership is far more durable than dependency. Today proved these are not just slogans. They work. The Crown Prince extended his hand, Their handshake wasn't ceremonial. It echoed like the first chapter of something real. "Mr. President," he said, "I believe this marks the onset of something transformative for both our regions." News of the alliance spread rapidly, well beyond the walls of the convention center. African markets surged as investors began pricing in the implications of Saudi-backed infrastructure. Across social platforms, young Africans shared clips of Traoré's speech with captions like, "This is what leadership looks like." Finally, someone speaking as an equal. The global media reacted swiftly, but the commentary was split. Western publications zeroed in on the geopolitical implications. How would this unexpected Saudi-African alignment affect Europe's and America's influence on the continent? Chinese media highlighted the strategic tension, raising questions about whether the Trans-Sahel corridor might undercut the momentum of China's Belt and Road Initiative. Meanwhile, outlets across the Middle East celebrated it as a breakthrough. Saudi Arabia was no longer merely a regional force. It was stepping into its role as a global actor. Yet the most significant reaction came from Africa itself. Within 48 hours of the announcement in Riyadh, presidents and prime ministers across the continent began reaching out to Saudi Arabia, to Burkina Faso, eager to join. The president of Senegal was the first to call, seeking ways for Dakar to integrate into the Trans-Sahel corridor. The momentum was real. This wasn't just a deal, it was the dawn of a new diplomatic architecture. The Prime Minister of Ethiopia followed, exploring whether the corridor could intersect with Chinese-built infrastructure already in place in the Horn. Even South Africa, long seen as the continent's most self-sufficient economy, began quietly assessing how it might align with this pan-African vision. But what made the moment historic wasn't just its scale, it was its sincerity. These weren't just polite overtures or symbolic gestures. They were concrete, coordinated steps, rooted in a shared recognition that something deeper was shifting. A realignment was underway, one where African nations no longer petitioned for a seat at the global table. They were beginning to build a new table altogether. Back in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, the mood was electric. Citizens gathered around televisions and radios, captivated by their president's performance on the global stage. For a nation long dismissed or patronized by the powers of the world, watching their leader treated as a peer by one of its most powerful monarchies was monumental. But Traoré wasn't caught in the applause. His focus remained sharp: deliver outcomes, not just headlines. In every interview following his return from Riyadh, he repeated the same principle. A handshake in Saudi Arabia means nothing unless we make tangible progress at home. True alliance isn't about intentions, it's about implementation. That grounded, no-nonsense mindset shaped everything that followed. No extravagant unveilings, no grand promises or flashy deadlines. Just execution. Traoré's government got straight to work, determined to convert diplomatic momentum into concrete transformation. The first decisive step, establishing the Trans-Sahel Coordination Office in Ouagadougou, a joint command hub staffed by Burkina officials and Saudi technical experts. Their mandate was as ambitious as it was urgent: transform the corridor from blueprint to reality within 5 years. And Saudi Arabia backed its words with action. Within just 3 months of the Riyadh summit, Saudi engineers were already in the Sahel, conducting feasibility studies. Saudi construction firms began bidding on infrastructure contracts. Saudi banks started forging financial bridges with African institutions. But this wasn't just about fast money or flashy announcements. What made it different was how it functioned. This wasn't simply Saudi capital flowing into African soil. It was a two-way collaboration. Knowledge wasn't outsourced. It was exchanged. African Engineers Co. designed project schematics with their Saudi counterparts. African economists shaped the financial models guiding corridor investments. African companies were prioritized in construction bids, not sidelined, and something deeper began to crystallize. This wasn't just a transport corridor. It was a new development doctrine, an alternative to decades of dependency. Where once African growth was tied to Western donors, Cold War chessboards, or Beijing's infrastructure diplomacy, this was different. It was South-South development, grounded in mutual respect, anchored in shared strengths, free from condescension, free from control. And across the continent, the shift resonated. For young Africans, the message landed powerfully. Global influence wasn't something to be passively received. it could be actively shaped. Universities introduced new courses on South-South cooperation and 21st-century geopolitics. Think tanks produced studies challenging outdated aid paradigms, reframing Africa not as a recipient but as a global stakeholder. 6 months after the Riyadh summit, the first segment of the Trans-Sahel corridor officially broke ground. The launch was intentionally low profile. No foreign dignitaries, no choreographed headlines, just the people who mattered most, local officials, regional engineers, and the workers who would lay every stone. In his address, President Traoré captured the spirit of the moment. Today, we're not just launching a road, we're laying the foundation for a new way of building together. We're proving that partnership surpasses patronage, that dignity triumphs over charity, and that the global South is ready to author its own future. A construction moved forward with remarkable efficiency. Saudi technical know-how merged with African labor and local materials, delivering ahead of schedule and below budget. But the real revolution: jobs, skills, ownership. Thousands of local workers were trained in advanced construction techniques and project management, building not only roads, but capacity that would last far beyond the project itself. By the end of the first year, the verdict was undeniable. This was no ceremonial alliance, no media stunt, no short-lived pilot. It was a proof of concept, and the world was watching. The Trans-Sahel corridor wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Trade between Saudi Arabia and Africa surged 60%, a clear indicator that the alliance wasn't symbolic, it was strategic. But perhaps the most powerful shift, the model began to spread. Inspired by the Riyadh framework, Brazil opened discussions with Nigeria on bilateral infrastructure financing. India expanded its investment in East Africa's emerging tech corridors. Indonesia explored cross-continental energy projects with West Africa. For the first time in decades, the global South wasn't reacting to global power plays. It was generating them. It wasn't just catching up to globalization, it was redesigned. Across the Atlantic, Mexico was forging fresh commercial ties with industrial hubs in North Africa. It wasn't a coincidence. The Saudi-African alliance had become more than a diplomatic headline. It had ignited something far larger. An expanding lattice of South-South coalitions reshaping the architecture of the global economy. But the most profound shift wasn't measured in contracts signed or exports tracked. It was philosophical, foundational. Gone was the old paradigm, where wealthy nations bestowed aid, and the global South waited for generosity trickled down through layers of conditionality. In its place rose something bolder and far more sustainable: emerging economies linking as equals, leveraging complementary strengths, sharing risks, and generating mutual rewards. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman captured this evolution perfectly in his keynote marking the first anniversary of the Riyadh summit. The President Traoré showed the world that real leadership doesn't mean arriving with every answer, he said. It means asking the right questions. He didn't come seeking rescue. He invited us to contribute to solutions that were already being built. That reframing didn't just alter how Saudi Arabia viewed its role in Africa. It redefined global partnership itself. And yet, as applause echoed across continents, Traoré remained grounded, uninterested in medals, focused solely on measurable impact. When asked to reflect on the alliance's success, he offered no self-congratulation. This worked, he explained, because it was built on honesty, not performance, on mutual benefit, not benevolence, on respect, not charity. And that model, it can thrive anywhere, if leaders have the courage to try it. What began as a lone, unapologetic proposal in Riyadh had since matured into a full-fledged framework for global cooperation. No longer was it just an MOU or development plan. It had become proof that dignity is not idealism, that collaboration isn't weakness, and that shared ownership delivers superior results to old hierarchies of dependence. As the first phase of the Trans-Sahel corridor neared completion, its real influence was already rippling outward. Entrepreneurs launched new businesses along the trade route, energized by access and opportunity. Schools and vocational programs opened in newly connected towns, laying down roots of long-term progress. And perhaps most transformative, African youth began to see their continent differently. no longer a region waiting for a lifeline. Now, a continent writing its own future. It all began with one leader's refusal to beg and his insistence on dignified cooperation. That bold stance had snowballed into a continental realignment, inspiring similar efforts from Latin America to Southeast Asia. And in Ouagadougou, the quiet capital where it all began, 10-year-old Musa now studied at night under electric light, dreaming of one day becoming an engineer. His world was different. A world where African leadership wasn't an afterthought, but a driver of global transformation. That photo of a child once seated in darkness had become something larger, an emblem of what's possible when partnership replaces patronage. Self-worth replaces sympathy, and leaders demand respect, not just pity. The shift was complete. But the true impact, it was only just beginning. And if this story moved you, if it made you see the world differently, or made you believe that real change is possible, then don't just scroll away. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already, because this is just the beginning of the stories we're telling. And if you want to go one step further, and drop a super thanks to support this journey so we can continue to bring these powerful narratives to life. Your voice matters. Your support makes the next chapter possible.